drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024, although once again, as I occasionally have to say, we are taping this on Monday night, October 21st. So you may hear us get the days wrong. And if you do, tough, you're not paying anything. So, you can either enjoy it, you can go somewhere else. I don't care. It's late. Second podcast we're doing today. I have no idea what we're talking about. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Back with us, media commentary columnist Christine Rosen, author of The Extinction of Experience. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Okay, I got one thing I can say, but it's very wonky and kind of boring, but weird and interesting. Two policy decisions seem to have been made by Kamala Harris today that are frankly seem eccentric, but are obviously responses to polling data or rich data that they're getting or something. Number one, she is now hitting Trump on Social Security. She is claiming that a new report says that the Social Security Trust Fund under Trump will run out in 6 years, but not if she's president. And I don't know why, because I haven't read the report, but apparently if she's president, the Social Security Trust Fund will never run out, not until the year 2 billion. I've just made that up. But
she have
Trump
lockbox?
She is bringing the lockbox to the table. We're returning to the lockbox of 2000. It's very exciting to have the lockbox back with us. It's just like going to a Billy Joel concert, listening to River of Dreams. Very thrilling, oldies but goodies. Anyway, so she's going after Trump on Social Security entitlements. So we got entitlements coming into the race here with 2 weeks to go. Entitlements, remember them? Used to be a big topic. Then we don't talk about it. We don't talk about budget. We talk about nothing. Harris suddenly talking about entitlements and seeming, according to what I see on Twitter, seeming to be shifting her position on fracking. According to our friend Andy Kaczynski of CNN, K-File, Harris campaign aide seems to be walking back her support for fracking on the campaign trail. A top climate campaign staffer told Politico Pro she's not promoting expanding it and said she didn't promote increased leases for fracking in the Inflation Reduction Act. So she was for the $87 billion in fracking before she was against it, or she was against the fracking and then she was for it, and now she's against it. Obviously, this is some kind of three-dimensional chess involving Pennsylvania politics that I don't even begin to understand, and either indicates that they have found a new path to victory, or that they are losing their minds, or that they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what will stick. Okay, go at it. Somebody talk.
I have to think that if the Harris campaign is getting into the weeds of policy, this is an act of sort of desperation. This is not where they've ever wanted to be. This is the campaign that speaks.
Hold on. Time out. Camilla Thorndike of the Harris campaign has issued a retraction of something she said this morning. I didn't explain myself clearly. Contrary to Trump's claims, the VP has not banned fracking, doesn't support banning fracking, and in fact cast the tie-breaking vote on the biggest pro-climate law ever, which, yes, opened new fracking leases. People know that's her position, says Camilla Thorndike, climate engagement director at Kamala HQ.
To my point, they don't want to be involved in the weeds of policy because they don't know what on earth they're doing. They will trip themselves up. They will contradict themselves. This is not where they can play.
I think that actually they do know exactly what they want to do if she wins the election, and that's ban fracking. And their constant teasing back and forth, always noticed by a staffer, and then another staffer retracts, reading the tea leaves that Kamala supposedly tells her staffers. I was struck today when she went on stage with Liz Cheney that all of the reports writing about her appearance noted, well, she stuck directly to her talking points. She didn't stray from her talking points. She just kept repeating her talking points. I think even mainstream media is getting frustrated with this. Abe's absolutely right. She doesn't want to get into policy because she's incapable of it. We know from 60 Minutes because they won't release the transcript of her interview, which was twice as long as what they aired. I think in part because she doesn't know how to get into policy answers very directly. And this is another example of their efforts to sort of flail around and signal one thing, while most likely as a governing president, she would not be sympathetic to fracking, let's say. I mean, she claimed in the debate that she wasn't against it, but there's always been something dodgy about her approach to fracking, and she does leave Pennsylvania.
Have not changed.
Right.
I just want to say that her values
she's gone
have not
around
changed.
she's been vice president for 4 years, and she's listened to the American people.
And her values have not changed. Everything else can change except her values.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what her values are, though. And I think that's actually part of the problem.
Well, her values are tied in Pennsylvania with Trump. So
But when she says my values haven't changed, I don't really know what that's supposed to mean, because it would presume that you already had a pre-set understanding of her values. She's trying to say that she's solid as a rock as a human being, and therefore needs to be given some flexibility on how she talks about policy because her values are strong. But that's an assertion. Obviously, there are ways in which you can discern people's values from their behavior, right? You can say they served in the military and therefore their values haven't changed because they dedicated their lives to service.
But you're assuming values is a positive word. Values can be terrible things depending on what they are, the person who holds them, right?
Well, that was something
power is a value.
That is something that my professor Alan Bloom used to say all the time, is that the use of the word values was one of the moments at which Western civilization began to crumble, because, of course, values we usually talk about are morals.
Right.
And we started talking about values, which are basically morals that are conditional or shift from person to person. And then, of course, can be, as Nietzsche said, transvalued. So you can have the transvaluation of all values in a revolutionary moment at which people start believing the opposite of what they did believe, because they're actually not fixed and attached to anything. And this is the result of the death of God. And I'm going on.
No, but it's a shame.
Trans values are values.
Nietzsche should have been brought up in that Bret Baier interview. That would have actually been a real gotcha question about her values.
Well, probably for both of them, to be fair. But okay, so her values haven't changed. She's for fracking. She's against fracking. She wants to signal to people who don't like fracking that she's not for fracking, and signal to people who like fracking that she might be for fracking, or at least she should be given credit for not being against fracking. And that's where she is. And she is now saying that Trump is going to destroy Social Security. Ordinarily, you would say that Trump was going to destroy healthcare, but maybe that's not working. And they have this study, and they're just picking up yet something else and using it as a stick. And there's 2 weeks to go. And here we are. Now, I want to address a matter brought up to me by a friend, a friend who is a listener to the podcast, someone that people know, and objected today to what he said was a tone he thought in our podcast, our Monday podcast, that seemed almost gleeful or triumphalist on Trump's behalf, and that this was something he did not like hearing and was upset by, because he doesn't like Trump, and though he doesn't like Harris either. Okay, so that's the interesting point that we get to also with 2 weeks to go. So Trump had a good weekend, had fun, was fun to watch, all of that. Yet tonight he went out and said, I'm the greatest president. And people are telling me I'm a greater president than George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Now, maybe that's funny. Maybe you could say it's funny or it's not funny. He said people said it to him, and that's what they say to him. Is that okay, or does it matter? Is it okay for him to say that was a greater president than Abraham Lincoln and George Washington?
Probably better than saying he was the worst treated president, including Abraham Lincoln.
Well, you already said that, right?
Yes,
So
that
we
is
already
something
had he
he
was
likes to
worse.
say.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
No president has been treated worse, including the guys who've been shot. So it's better. It's better than that. It's an improvement over that.
Okay. So, but let's just go to this question of where do you stand if you are the kind of person who looks at both candidates and says, "Dear Lord, how have we gotten into this position?" Which I think is a view held by tens of millions of people who are looking at the choice before them and saying, how did this happen? And the story is a 40 or 50-year story that brings us to this point, so we can't retell it here. But I think there are different choices for a lot of different kinds of people, meaning you either believe you have a deep obligation to vote, right? Which I actually don't believe. I believe one of the freedoms in the United States is the freedom not to vote. We don't live in a country in which one is obliged to cast a vote. You are not, your participation is not mandatory. We don't mandate participation for citizens except in like jury duty, or if there is conscription or something like that. There's almost no mandatory requirements. One of the things that was so unnerving about what happened during COVID was that somehow we suddenly had these mandates imposed on us that were jarring to our very core, because that's not the way we live. Okay, so I don't think you have an obligation to vote. But if you are the sort of person who thinks you have an obligation to vote, and you are in a state that is going to be a decisive state, I guess you may be in a real pickle if you are not somebody who is unambiguously for Trump or a partisan Republican, or unambiguously for Harris and a partisan Democrat, right?
Yeah, I mean, pickle is the what was Michael Brendan Doherty's famous headline from 2016? This election is God's judgment on us. So I mean, we've been in pickle space since then. I think Biden gave some people a reprieve because he's just so much more likable, and was thought not to be corrupt like Hillary Clinton. But I think that the pickle space is where we've been in for the better part of a decade, which is this is especially why libertarians are so keen on people not voting at all as a protest in the terrible choices that we've been given, which is an argument against mandatory voting it is a a choice between those two candidates, that if the polity signals frustration with the choices enough, maybe the idea is that maybe that will get us better candidates in the future. But there has to be some way out of the bad candidates pickle that we seem to be stuck in too. And I don't know how you vote your way out of that, being handed two candidates.
I do think that comparing himself to some of this nation's greatest leaders is bad in this sense. First of all, it's completely untrue. He's nowhere near those men, and he shouldn't really even be comparing himself at all. But it's a reminder in the final days of this election of his lack of humility, of his vanity, of his utter disregard for the meaning of history and the usefulness of seeing himself as one of many, a very select group of people who have achieved this high office and bear the responsibility to the Constitution, to the American people. And it's almost his silliness. I mean, he just doesn't take it seriously enough. Now, Harris, in her own way, also doesn't take it seriously enough, but from a different angle. And I do think a lot of people's choices, if, as you say, John, I'm getting to the camp of I can't even. I'll either write someone in, or I can't cast a ballot for either of these two. And I felt a similar way in 2016.
But you also live in D.C. You live in D.C.,
so my vote
and so
matters.
your vote doesn't matter.
My vote has
Right.
never counted, so I can have an existential crisis about this, and it doesn't matter. So, but
that's the answer. People should move to DC. Everybody struggling with this question
or New York
to
City.
DC.
Yeah.
But the point is that if people really believe they should vote and they know it's a binary choice, it comes down to whether that vanity and solipsism and chaos and reminders of how he was towards the end of his term when he lost, and his denialism of the election results, January 6th, all that, which is why Harris's campaign is hammering his instability and his seeming instability in age and all that. If that makes you fearful, you vote for Harris. If if a fourth Obama term and or second Biden term is scary because of your actual real world experience under those two, which is high inflation, global chaos, then maybe you vote for Trump. But I think there are a lot of people going to decide on election day this time around.
I think this is a moment in need of a term, of a scholarly term, probably German or French, sociological term that describes the mood that overtakes the voting public when faced with bad extreme choices, and describes their propensity to then go more extreme. I feel as if that is a thing when faced with Harris, who kind of looks the part, kind of ventriloquizes the part, Trump, who doesn't look the part, Trump, who is very obviously wacky. There is, I sense it, I have no data to back it up, a propensity to say, okay, under these circumstances, and we've been living in some version of these circumstances for quite a while. Under these circumstances, yeah, why not? Let's go full crazy.
There is a German word.
That's a thing. Oh,
there's a
German word. What is it?
Okay, I did take 1 year of German in college, but my pronunciation's terrible, and I worked as a nanny in Berlin for a while, so that's my cred, which is nothing. But there's a word. It's like verschlimmbessern or verschlimmbessern, which means to make something worse by trying to improve it. And there's a sense in which, like, the American
that's it.
people,
We got it. I'm telling you,
Verschlimmbessern.
I'm telling you, that's where
we're
we're
gonna
at.
have to. Someone, yes, please write us at podcast@commentary.org. Spell it for us. Pronounce
or
it
else
for
I'll
us.
make one up.
Okay,
that's what the American people,
yes.
They're trying to improve what's happened, and it's just going to make it worse. It doesn't matter either choice.
Yeah, it's like when you improvise. When you have something going wrong, you have a cut or something, and you don't know what to do, and you'll
do a tight tourniquet, and then your finger falls off.
You get tourniqueted, or you end up like getting sepsis because you put mud on it because somebody told you that's more helpful,
or even
something
more
like
simple.
that.
It's like if you're running late, slow down, take your time.
Right,
you're already late. Like there's that sort of mindset.
Okay. So I think I know a whole bunch of talking anecdotally over the course of the last 8 years. There are people I know who didn't like Trump, who then liked something that Trump did. And they were like, okay, you know what? Abraham Accords, or I don't know, getting rid of the star deduction, whatever. He's done things. I really like them. I'm all in. And then 2 days later, he says or does something, and they go, man, I'm not in anymore. And this has happened time and time again this year.
I told you, like 2017, he's the bad boyfriend, but nobody.
Yeah, no, right. No, but I mean, it's really interesting because people really do, and I'm talking people I think who in the end will vote for him, but want to be enthusiastic, like are in a mood to decide that if they're in, they're in. And he just pulls the rug out from under them and says, in a kind of frightening way. I mean, this is where he does have a kind of frightening quality, like the bad boyfriend or something like that, where it's like, no, I'm going to make sure that when you're going to vote for me, and you're going to vote for me in spite of yourself, I want you to. That shows my true domination of you. That you vote for me in spite of your best instincts. You're taking me at my worst. That's where I have all the emotional power. If you vote for me at my worst.
But there were a lot of people who
he doesn't know that this is
right. But there are a lot of people who cast a ballot for Biden with that logic. I think they said, you know what, Trump is just too all over the place. You know, the January 6th, the denialism, the ping-ponging back and forth on things, the love letters to dictators, et cetera, et cetera. They'd had enough of his crazy. They cast a vote for Biden, thinking grown up in the room, stability, et cetera, and none of that happened. And as she won't distance herself from that administration, and herself has all of these qualities that could exacerbate that particular Biden sort of chaos, that is why people are caught. I mean, it really is. It's a real bind. These are two really terrible candidates in many, many different ways.
Okay, I need to say, because you got yourself a little confused there. Of course, people did not vote for Biden because of January 6th.
No, sorry, not January 6th. Right. But I meant like the initial election.
Whatever.
Charlottesville.
Yeah, or who knows? Who knows what you want to
Well, pick. Just a different January 6th, just not that one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. January 6th, 2019. Okay. Yeah. But I think the point is that you voted for Biden, got Biden. You got a different kind of chaos.
Right.
Okay. You didn't get chaos coming out of the White House or a kind of soap opera in the presidency, but you got Afghanistan. You got the pullout from Afghanistan. You got the war in Ukraine.
Got inflation.
You got
crime.
You got Chinese balloons.
The border.
Flying over Mary. You got the border. You got rising crime. You got shoplifting. None of this, by the way, some of this not really the result of Biden policies. I mean, the shoplifting is a local DA imposed progressive prosecutor project.
But there was no leadership from this administration.
But there was no leadership saying, how dare you, everybody better stop shoplifting, or, we're very disappointed in you for all your shoplifting or something like that. So it was a different kind of chaos. Yeah. So it was trading the personal chaos to the policy failures that led to the sense that the world was spinning off its axis, that Putin was on the march, that the Taliban were on the march, and then that Hamas and the terrorists were on the march, and anti-Semitism was on the march, and disorder and decay were on the march. And that is, these are different kinds of failures, obviously, or different kinds of problems.
I mean, I think that you point out that's a good way to look at the difference between the no drama that they were trying to portray and what a world that is not consumed by drama actually is like, right? These things Putin goes on the march, the Middle East starts up, all these things are happening, and Biden was very calm. There was no chaos around Biden. He was on the beach in Delaware. He was perfectly, but they were projecting this, all right, they better not go this far. They better not go this far. But they were so keen on projecting a "we're not freaking out" brand that they just stood there in one place while everything moved around.
I think it's going to be very hard to know until the histories come out and people actually describe what went on inside this administration, to know if what you describe is actually sort of the policy direction that things happened, or whether his infirmity was much more pronounced much earlier, and the inability
the second one
establish, right. I think maybe, but we don't know. But the inability to establish a consistent or coherent tone to things was the result of the fact that the administration was managing a president in decline, not a world in decline, not a country in decline, but a president in decline who was still the only person who could really be the final arbiter in our constitutional system when it came to certain types of choices, and you can't just take them out of his hands. And he's not so non-compos mentis that he isn't going to weigh in or say how it was that he wanted things, but he could be very inconstant. And we are not there yet. We don't know what has happened in this country in the last 3 years in the highest reaches of the policymaking apparatus and what effect that had.
This is such an important point, because so much, I think, of what has happened during the Biden administration is terrible. So much of what has hurt the Biden administration during this time is his inability to sell what is terrible as okay, which is what Obama did fantastically, right? We all lived through the Obama years, and it was like, oh my God, pulling out of Iraq, and then ISIS starts up, crosses the border. Obama lets Syria cross the red line. There's the Yazidis being taken captive by ISIS. Russia comes in to manage the civil war in Syria. The Iran deal is this terrible thing that will allow the Iranians to have a bomb, whatever the time frame was then. And Obama managed, to some degree, for a significant amount of the population, to say, this is all good. This is the way it should be. We're not starting wars. We're working things out. Of course, there are wrinkles. We are trying to make peace with our enemies, not our friends. That is the point of making peace, and all that BS. Biden's total inability to sell his bad policies is a very, very big deal. Someone like Obama might have done a better job at selling equally horrific policies.
It's been interesting to watch him stump for Biden recently, because I was reminded of that exact thing, because everything coming out of his mouth, if you parse it, you're like, this is all a bad idea. This isn't going to work.
But Obamacare wasn't popular, right? That was the thing. He had trouble.
Obamacare wasn't popular.
Right.
The Iran deal wasn't popular,
but
he lost the House.
He knew how to talk about things in a way that I think we're not, and Trump can't do it, and Harris certainly can't do it, and Biden didn't do it very well. It's been a long time since we've had that kind of communicator, even if
it is important to note, if we're going to bring up, Obama's competency, that his competency involved the retention of his own stature. But by the time his administration was over, his party had lost 1,100 elective offices in the United States and the presidency. So, and had lost the House and had lost the Senate. So, he maintained himself, and lost everything else. In a funny way, you could almost make the reverse case about Biden, who, not really through any means of his own, maybe just through the Dobbs decision, and the role of Trump in 2022 in getting psychotic in promoting literally psychotic, schizophrenic, and deranged and terrible candidates to lose Senate races across the country that Republicans could have won. The Democratic Party outperformed Biden, unlike the Democratic Party under Obama, which was destroyed and shattered seriatim, both at the national and the state and the local levels, while he won 2 elections, one in a landslide and then one relatively commandingly. Not a landslide, but 4 points and I think 350 electoral votes. Like he made out fine.
His party was in such shambles by 2016 that Donald Trump became president.
That's exactly right. Obama is.
His immediate successor was Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So it shows
we know there are other reasons. We know there are other reasons for that, including Hillary Clinton, the reopening of Hillary Clinton's email thing. But remember, Hillary was the candidate of the Democratic Party because Obama willed it so. Like, that was part of his job. Part of his work was in ensuring that she be his successor behind the scenes. And that was really, congratulations to him on a brilliant call there. As I say, he managed his own political career in a manner that could only be described as genius, and managed everything else in American politics in a manner that could only be described as catastrophic for his own interests once he got his 4 pieces of legislation passed before 2010, by the middle of 2010, and that was the end of his presidency, pretty much, and for good reason, and that's what the American people wanted. Let me just stop and talk to you about a friend of the podcast, the writer Aaron Zevi, who has another free book he is giving away to our listeners. Just go to his website, www.zevystories.com. That's ZEVYSTORIES.com, and pick any book. Send your choice to info@zevystories.com, ZEVYSTORIES.com, info@zevystories.com, and Zevi will mail you a signed copy for free. He suggests schlepping across the Nile. Word schlepping is pretty great to have a book with schlepping in the title. So I think you might really enjoy that one. But those are short stories. If you're not a fan of short fiction, there are picture books for your children or grandchildren, including The Delightfulest Snowman in Jerusalem. So that is zevystories.com, ZEVY stories.com. All right. So I want to read to you something from my friend Nick Catoggio, formerly known as Allah Pundit, writing at the Dispatch. He is, of course, an anti-Trump conservative, will vote for Harris because he thinks that Trump is the worst, as he says, the worst president since Woodrow Wilson and maybe of all time. But here's what he is writing about what happens if Trump wins. And he quotes our friend Mark Halperin, who was on Tucker Carlson's show, Twitter show. And Mark told Tucker, "I think a Trump victory will be the cause of the greatest mental health crisis in the history of the country. I think tens of millions of people will question their connection to the nation, their connection to other human beings, their connection to their vision of what their future for them and their children could be like. I think there'll be alcoholism, there'll be broken marriages. They think he's the worst person possible to be president. This could be something so traumatic it's impossible for even the most mentally healthy person to truly process and incorporate it into your daily life." And Tucker apparently said, "Are you serious?" laughing at Mark for what he said. And Nick Catoggio endorses this view. He says, America has had spells of mass public disillusionment before, but 2 realities have always conspired to soften the psychological blow. One is that the disillusionment happens gradually, not suddenly. Think of the wars in Vietnam and to a lesser extent Iraq. Most who grew to oppose them and eventually regard them as corrupt came to that conclusion over the course of years, adapting incrementally. The other is the comfort of knowing that the government whose policies caused your disillusionment can be replaced. If you hated the war in Vietnam, you could vote Republican in 1968. If you hated Nixon and Watergate, you could vote Democratic in 1976. And so on. Democracy is a mechanism of accountability. Neither of these constellations will obtain if Trump wins next month. The disillusion will happen suddenly, not gradually. Millions of Americans who believed Trump was competitive earlier this year only because of Joe Biden's infirmity will discover that replacing the president with a much younger Democrat as nominee didn't solve the problem. Trump didn't win because he was marginally less unfit for office than a senescent 81-year-old. He won because the country wanted him back, and the disillusionment this time will be due to the American people themselves. So that is Nick Catoggio in the Dispatch, his column on October 21st. So I read this to you to say that how credible do you find the scenario that, things were not great in America after Trump won in 2016. There were little spasms of violence, outbreaks of things here and there. And then, of course, there wasn't violence, but there was the gigantic mass demonstration, 3.5–4 million people, the weekend of the inaugural, the Pussy Hat Brigades, the Women's March. Almost
there was
immediately calls
also
for
the X factor here is there was also COVID.
No,
So
no, this is
normally,
2016.
no.
I'm
I know,
talking.
but I'm saying
Okay.
in terms of a Trump win after 2016, how would people interpret it now? Is that when we talk about a mental health crisis, you add in the only thing that makes something like that plausible at all to me is that we sort of, as a country, have been teetering a bit since COVID and after, and dealing with the kind of, the loneliness epidemic and the I think alcoholism increased over that time, and we had the opioid crisis, and we had all sorts of stuff, and so the only thing is that it may be that the population is softened up for, already sort of in a bad mood, and will have a place to focus that. But otherwise, I would be very surprised by, I get the impression from people I talk to that a Trump victory is less surprising now than it was the first time.
Okay, but
So
you're talking about general people, and he is talking about the people who think that Trump is the worst person in the world and that he won the presidency, was the worst person in the world, lost the presidency, and will now be back with the country fully aware of who he was and what he did and everything that he was, and believing him to
Right.
be the worst person in the
But
world. Yeah.
what is actually the larger problem here? I love Allah Pundit, and I love Mark, and I frankly despise Tucker. But I think the idea that we should worry about a mental health crisis as the result of a presidential election, to me, represents a huge missing of the larger issue. If that's where the country's, if we have gotten to a place where the mental well-being of untold millions, or apparently from your description, or of a huge portion of the American population, hangs on the result of an election, we have a much deeper problem here that has nothing to do with Trump, has
But
nothing
that's
to do
what,
with
but
left and right. Yeah.
But that's what he said. Okay, so this blends Seth's point and Ala Pundit's point, Nick Katojo's point, which is that the country is not in a good place. And we began this podcast talking about the fact that we are faced with this horrible choice. That there are many people in this country who are enthusiastic about the choice. Let's say 30% are enthusiastic about Trump and 30% are enthusiastic about Harris, or 35% each. And then there's 30% who are like, how on earth is this the choice that we have? And they're going to have to sort themselves
Well,
out.
and both of the 35% that are pro-Trump or pro-Harris are really dug in on it being,
Yes.
Absolutely a life-threatening election if their candidate doesn't win. To
Exactly.
the point of, yeah.
So the issue here is that if Harris wins, I think this is Nick's point. If Harris wins, she may be mediocre. She may be bad. She may be bad at it. She may be stupid, all of that. But she exists within a realm in which we don't actually know what she's going to do. We don't know what she's going to be like as president. People are tested. Nobody expected George W. Bush to become a wartime president. All of that. You don't know what's going to happen, and give her and you're going to have to give her a chance, because that's how the normal run of things. And everybody goes, Trump wins, and you're getting, on the one hand, this incredibly unpredictable person, but somebody who held the office and behaved in a certain way, then behaved in all kinds of terrible ways after he lost, not only January 6th, but the way he controlled the Republican Party's senatorial choices in a way that allowed Joe Biden to prevail in getting a lot of trillions of dollars worth of legislation that, had the two Republicans won in Georgia in January of 2020, would not have passed. We would not have had, $4 trillion in extra spending that Biden pushed through. So he's to blame for some of that. And
I don't like
he's going to be president again. And we
Well, some of the guidance for the hardcore Kamala Harris voters who think Trump is an existential threat to the nation and to democracy, a lot of that will depend on what the leadership of the Democratic Party does if he wins. And that is where I do have an interesting concern, because all of the rhetoric and all of the claims that they've made and all of the, I think in many cases, completely legitimate criticism of Republican leaders who didn't call out Trump when he was trying to undermine the results of an election, they will face that same challenge. And it will, I think, be quite difficult for some of them, people like Jamie Raskin, who's already raised questions about whether or not they should certify a Trump election because he's an insurrectionist. I mean, I think we're going to have the Democratic Party going through a very difficult, challenging moment about what is a legitimate election and what is not, in the same way that the Republicans did. The Republicans kind of failed that test under Trump, I think. Will the Democrats pass it? It's hard to say, because they have plenty of elements in their party who have already kind of teed up for their voters this idea that if Trump wins, we will not let that stand. There've been a lot. There's been some signaling of that from some people in the Democratic Party.
I think we can agree that the Republican Party has, through the balance of our lifetimes, been the more nationalistic, the more patriotic party. Like that, it's lined up with the military, with the advancement of American values, with the opposition to communism, support for free markets, all of that. Trump has confused and muddied and complicated these matters, as has some of the policy problems that were created during the Bush administration and after. But the Republican Party generally lines up as the party of patriotism. The Democratic Party is a party, let's say, of self-criticism, or American self-criticism, or the idea that the American project needs to be constantly improved and revised and made progressive, because the future can be better because the past was bad, and we keep harping on the past and how bad it is and all that. Well, okay, so if I'm right in this very caricaturish description of these two parties, Democratic Party's patriotism and support for America as the great exceptional nation that has, created the most remarkable political system ever known to mankind. So it ends up 240 years or 250 years into the American experiment, with Donald Trump getting reelected to a second term. And they just aren't going to they're just going to, I think this is Katojio's ultimate point, they're going to withdraw from the American experiment. I don't know what that means. They are going to say, we were what we were taught, what we've been taught by Howard Zinn and by the land acknowledgements and by the Black Lives Matter and everything. It's all true. This country is a country of sin, and many of the majority of my fellow citizens, or the people in the states that determine the Electoral College, are bad. They have chosen a bad man to be president. They are bad too. I'm not with them. We have nothing in common, and the country is over. Now, we hear that kind of rhetoric every election year, but where I disagree with Abe is I think a lot of people are really genuinely and truly going to believe that. They kind of believed it in 2016, and they kind of settled down because they were active. They organized. They did what Nick said. They organized. Like Democrats were, the liberals were activated, and they marched, and they won special elections in 2017, and they won the House in 2018. And they were, they kicked ass and they didn't sit on they got themselves all hepped up to save the country from this great evil. And now the great evil might be restored through national fiat, through the same process by which they fought it.
I totally get it.
Okay.
I think part of the danger in looking at it this way is that it ignores, and this is going to make me sound like much more of a sort of right-wing cultural warrior than I am. You're ignoring, or this ignores, the huge segment of the right that says, I'm going to lose my mind if the Democrats and the liberals and the social liberals retain power. I have teenage daughters. I have teenage sons. I have children. My kids are being taught institutionally to think in crazy ways, and I am seeing the results of it. And this is a topsy-turvy world that I can't tolerate. So I think it is absolutely as valid on both sides, sadly, among opposite populations
And he's
to
revving
look
them
at
up
it this
for it.
way. What's that?
And he's revving them up for it a bit again.
Yes.
It was unfair what happened with Biden. It was unfair that she could come in and do this, right? But here's the thing. I thought, and I'm not sure how to phrase this, but I thought the reaction from the crowd when Trump was nearly assassinated the first time, I guess we have to say which time we're talking about, which time the president was shot, but the first time, I thought that established something interesting about the people who love the movement and the energy of Trump world enough to go out to his rallies, which was they didn't lose their minds at a moment when they could be forgiven for losing their minds. There was, like we talked about it at the time, but there was a sort of preternatural calm, people helping out, people talking to the cops. There was no like, oh, the deep state are here. There was plenty of complaints about that stuff after, but in the moment, Trump's people out there in the rally were like, okay, we'll handle this. We'll be okay. Let's get people need help. So I think that people are not really concerned, weirdly, because I think people say, oh, the MAGA people are crazy. But I think everybody sort of knows now that aside from, the Viking vegan or whatever, they're not actually all that crazy. And they're probably not the type to go on some sort of, mass demonstration kick for 6 months.
The right
Yeah, the right.
is what you're saying.
Specifically, Trump's followers were there and level-headed it at a moment like that.
Right.
I have trouble picturing like their version of the Women's March coming out of the election, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, I mean, the question that will preoccupy us in the wake of a Harris victory is there a way to harness everything that Abe is talking about? That is the cultural discomfort of the right and all kinds of things that seem to be majority views of the American people that are being imposed on them by liberal elites, trans stuff in particular, but all kinds of other things as well. And whether they can be pulled away from the focus on Trump as the motive actor in repairing things or beating the liberals up or something into exactly the kind of response that Obama generated from the Tea Party, or that Trump generated from Democrats who organize themselves the way Republicans or right-wingers organize themselves in relation to COVID, and at local levels, and the behavior of school boards and all of that during 2021 that got Glenn Youngkin elected and scored all those unexpected victories all over the place in school boards and things like that. Can they deal with the disappointment of losing the election and reassert their place as the
ideal? Well, they can if two things happen. I mean, it'd be great if the Republicans take back control of both houses of Congress. That would help, because then that'll stall things she wants to do that would be bad. It would reignite the understanding that, okay, we're in opposition in the executive and the agencies, but we have this power and we can do that. But it's also going to take some leaders to emerge post-Trump leadership, which is what the Republican Party has no vision of going forward. I mean, DeSantis was an option that didn't make it. I mean, we've got his running, Vance might also be an option, but there has to be someone who fills that vacuum. And Trump is going to complain for a long time about his loss, and he's going to try. I think two things might change people's willingness to get on board with him. All the lawsuits that were lost about the electoral stuff. And also the almost 100% conviction rate of anyone who trespassed during January 6th on the grounds of the Capitol. So they do know that they are likely to face consequences if there's any law-breaking attempts or any false claims of electoral mischief. So in that sense, the rule of law might tamp down that instinct. But a lot of this depends on how Trump behaves if he loses.
Okay, so that's Trump. So let's go to the other side and where Nick Cotogio begins, which is that Trump wins. What happens? I mean, I think it is very possible. I mean, on the one hand, it's weird because you don't get the sense that the rage against Trump winning is like street level rage. I could be wrong, but that's not the feeling. The feeling is that it is American elite. It is the college educated who will lose their minds, right? I mean, who will, having been trained to believe that America is a highly problematic country, will now have that view entirely fulfilled forever, and they will lose their. And I don't know what that means because they're not exactly the sort of people who go around and, smash windows and things like that, except, if they're working for Hamas.
Right.
So
that's part of the question, right? That there's a huge contingent of people wearing Hamas headbands right now that are who you would expect to be activated in that manner. But
are they going to be activated by a Trump victory? Does that what they care about?
That's what I'm saying. The college crowd is sort of
that's the college crowd. But I'm not talking about the college kids. I'm now actually talking about the people that Americans who vote for Harris because they're afraid of Trump, and then Trump wins, and in other words, the attitude of Morning Joe becomes the attitude of, I don't know, Jews in Germany in 1935. I mean, is that, or the idea that Hitler is about to take power? I mean, they had that. They were sort of fooling around with that idea. And then it turned out that Trump was too incompetent really to install this dictatorship that they thought he was going to install in 2017. He did the Muslim ban at the beginning and then there were blinds at airports and everything just sort of collapsed, and it was clear he didn't know what the hell he was doing, and neither did they. And everybody who knew what they were doing quit. Paul Ryan quit, and everybody it's like, okay, the hell with this. Nothing's going to get. We can't even pass the repeal of Obamacare because he screwed that up too. Although Republicans still blame John McCain for that wrongly.
And it'll be again a 51-49 Senate or whatever.
Right. So I don't know, but I'm just saying. So Abe, as our, what do they do? What's going to happen?
See, I think if
something's going to happen,
if there is to be a second coming of a Trump presidency, I actually think the response is going to be less hysterical than the first one, just by virtue of the fact that we've had one. I remember, this is purely anecdotal. I remember when Trump won, I got a text from a dear childhood friend who's a liberal, has 2 kids, and daughters, and he said, I don't mean to laugh, are my daughters going to be safe? And I said, yes, your daughters are going to be safe. That kind of what did we just dive into feeling is not going to be there.
But they did.
Go ahead.
They did try lawfare, right? So once he won, there was the protest, the Pussy Hat March, all the hand wringing online and performative outrage. But then they actually got down to business in trying to oust him, and they used all kinds of ways that we now know, some of which were basically illegal lies. The media was engaged in all kinds of aiding and abetting of that. And that didn't work. So if he wins re-election, they've learned that the lawfare doesn't work. So where do they go? Where does that sort of the combination of media institutions that have been claiming he's a fascist and sort of, for lack of a better term, the administrative state, the sort of vast federal government and law enforcement in particular at the federal level, where do they go with this energy? What do they look for? How are they going to try to get him another time? Impeachment has just become a political football, so they'll try that. But where
Well,
do
they can
they
only
go?
try that if they have
If
a
they
body of Congress, if they have the House to
Right.
impeach him with.
Right. So what's
Right.
going to happen? What's going to happen
Okay.
if he doesn't?
Here's what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe nothing happens between November and January because they have denied themselves the thing that they actually tried first before Trump did, which is faithless electors, or trying to get people to not, to somehow switch their votes in the Electoral College. Remember that? That was a thing in 2016. Two people did, in fact, not vote for Trump out of the 306 electoral votes that he got. He actually only got 304 scored. But they did that. Then because of January 6th, they can't play that hand of some new elector slates, whatever, however they would play that game. But when he pardons him, there are moments in time that will create very peculiar and unprecedented circumstances, because he will pardon himself on January 20th.
Right. And on that
the first act of his presidency will be to pardon himself.
And on that note, the question is going to be, has the failure of lawfare, as Christine calls it, will that embolden him to just think that he can do anything now in the second term? That's
that's
one of the fears.
Yes, that's the fear.
Because we can't stop him in the legal that he's going to be supercharged Trump. Right. And he is the type of person to dismiss the consequences of his actions.
Right.
Well, Biden will also have issued some pardons, I imagine, for family members. So at least he'll be.
Okay, so Biden pardons Hunter. And look, if Trump were smart, Trump would pardon Biden.
Yeah.
Trump would say, you can't behave this way toward a president. I said you can't behave. I'm pardoning Biden. And Clinton. Hey, I'll pardon Clinton too. Clinton's still alive. I'll pardon Carter. Carter might still be alive when he is sworn. Carter is outliving everybody. So you got Obama. He'll pardon Obama. I mean, whatever. Pardon Hillary. He could do a whole mass pardon of political leaders to cover for his own pardon and muddy the waters or something like that. But say it's not that. Say he pardons 500 January 6th protesters. I don't know what he did. I honestly don't know. I'm just saying that there are things that he will do that have not happened before. And I don't know how things will shake down. I don't know who's going to be in the streets doing what, how the fights will take place. But, from 1969 to 1973, we've talked about this many times. There were thousands of domestic bombings by young American terrorist groups across the United States, 1,200, I believe, in all, people who believed that the country had, attained a level of illegitimacy due to Vietnam and other things that could not be sustained. I don't know if that's the path. If Americans take up terroristic activities. I don't think that it will be nothing. I mean, it's just maybe it's just too hard to see where it goes. But if we have a mental health crisis, some of that might be depression, and sometimes mental health crises lead to aggression and disinhibition and impulse control problems, leading to people, just going up to people who are walking down the street wearing a MAGA hat and, smashing them over the head with a baseball bat. And then having other people run out.
The George Floyd riots, some people were saying, look, boredom may actually be playing into this too, because they've been sitting at home.
Right.
And they're like, you can go outside, but only if you're protesting for justice. And so suddenly it was like, I can breathe the fresh air and hang out with my friend. That was the only way, as long as you also smashed windows on Fifth Avenue, you were allowed to go out. So, I mean, but at the same time, the counter argument to that's its own counter argument, which is, okay, so we had that with the George Floyd era, and then we had it with the Gaza era. And, before that, we had it with the Women's March and all this other stuff. Maybe that's just what we get. Sometimes a Democrat is president, sometimes a Republican is president, but this cohort of the American electorate seems pretty ready to smash stuff on a pretext. And maybe the problem is really that there's a kind of a standing, I don't want to call them an army, but there's this sort of standing reserves of okay, just tell us what we're mad about, like when unions hire people to stand on picket lines.
Okay, but you'll have Tucker on the one side, Tucker and the Claremont Institute, and I don't know who else, who will offer the intellectual justification for right-wing for MAGA counteraction against the evils of the Harris administration that could go in very odd directions. And if you have radical action on the part of anti-Trump people, if he wins, then we are back in the late 60s, early 70s, where the entire intellectual class creates excuses, philosophical arguments for those who break the law and do terrible things to the people that they don't like on the grounds that the country has gone evil and they don't really have much of an option but to do, civil disobedience is no longer an option because it doesn't work to scare people into change.
The best thing that could happen is that one of the major networks or streaming services should give Trump a new reality show, like The Comeback Kid or something that will just give him constant attention, occupy him, allow him to justify himself every day as much as he wants, and just that would be a healthy response if he loses.
So here's the question, John. So what brought America out of those periods? We've had those periods. What about the end of those periods can we?
Well, that's the complicated part, right? We haven't had that many periods, right? We had a national crisis of self-confidence. We lost the Vietnam War. Watergate took down a president.
Leadership.
We had the Jimmy Carter presidency, and
Ronald
things
Reagan,
were
and a different way of talking about the country again.
Well, that was it. But I mean, the other way of looking at it is the only way out of this is through, one way or another. There is going to be a legitimacy crisis in the United States of a different order from the one we faced in 2016, 2017. And it's going to be worse. It'll be worse on the Democrats' part. And I don't know if it could be really much worse on the Republican or the MAGA side than January 6th, than the months leading up to January 6th. But as I say, I think you could see this being a kind of bracing moment of like, we are going to have to harness actual electoral power as we did in 2020 and 2020 and 2021 to save ourselves from what's going on here and snap out of this delusion that there was a savior figure and do it ourselves brick by brick. But on the Democratic side, I don't see that at all. I don't see where they go. I don't see how they, there could be like mass refusal to pay your taxes or something like that, which would be kind of funny. I don't know.
I think, look, in the event of a Trump win, I think he mostly plays it cool in terms of overextending his power. I don't actually think we'll see much of that, at least not right off the bat. I do think, and this is why I've been screaming about the horrors of this since 2020, and then again since October 7th of last year. The left has learned that it is perfectly okay, and you will get away with everything if you come out in the streets in huge numbers with masks over your face and commit great violence and great destruction in the name of whatever cause you think you are representing. And in that case, I think both 2020 and the past year have been training grounds for the anti-Trump resistance of a potential second Trump presidency.
Well, okay. So I think we can end it, but I will offer you this stipulation, which is that where that worked, of course, what was in blue areas, blue states with Democratic governors, Democratic mayors who did not want to confront left-wing crowds,
right,
or believed or shared their belief. So that's Minneapolis, that's Portland, that's New York, that's Philadelphia. The 10 cities where Democrats live that constitute like 80% of the Democratic Party in a funny way, live in 10 metropolitan areas in the United States. And so they could work their will there. They learned. They could shoplift, they could do this. What if they start coming out in red states,
Right.
where they have governors and mayors and people like that who are not interested in
that's what happened with the
curtailing?
Hamas protesters in Florida, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And then they
And with
went
the
away.
carjackers in Virginia who actually get arrested
Right.
and prosecuted versus DC, where they
Right.
walk.
Okay. So, but it tamped down pretty quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's a political crisis, it doesn't tamp down as easily. That's the problem. The problem is that the martyrdom will become the possibility of being a political martyr may be very alluring to people in a way that it was not before. And that it was a choice they didn't have to make before, but maybe like that's what you want to do, right? You want to like torment Greg Abbott in Texas. You want to torment DeSantis in Florida. You want to torment I don't know, the governor of Idaho, or, the governor of Utah, or the governor of Indiana, whatever. That's who you want to torment. That's who you want to, and you want to, like terrorists do, bring out the cops to fire on you, to make you a martyr. Like, so that's where this is a scenario of chaos in the places where the training grounds were created. Everybody got away with it because the authorities didn't engage. College campuses, the authorities didn't engage. These cities, the authorities didn't engage. But that wouldn't be the case in law and order places, and that could be a real showdown. Like that's something where we're going to see things that we haven't seen before. That's what unnerves me about the novelty that this election has thrown in our path here. There are things there are boundaries you don't wish to test, and we have no more boundaries, and so test we're going to get. So this is as crushingly morose as we can get. I was saying to somebody the person who complained to me today that complained to me yesterday that we were too cheerful about Trump today. And I said, the truth is maybe I sound more jovial or more high spirited because, as I said, I think on the day of the beepers, or maybe the day of Sinwar's killing, I don't even remember which. Not the Sinwar, because it was earlier than that. This was the first time in 8 years or 9 years of doing the podcast that I was in an unambiguously good mood about anything. Except like when my kids had their, bar and bat mitzvahs, or my nieces and nephews had babies and things like that. But that's personal. Like was a very long time until the last 4 or 5 weeks as a supporter of Israel that, I felt like something had changed in the world in a direction that gave me hope for the future and for justice being done and all of that. And so the
point is it's despite Trump is what you're saying. It wasn't giddiness having anything to do with Trump at all.
No, my good mood had nothing to do with Trump.
Right.
And maybe I communicated that wrongly, and I should remain. I just, then as I say, when he says I'm better than George Washington, first of all, okay, so there have been 45, 46 presidents. So it's okay to compare yourself to George Washington. What you're supposed to do is find yourself wanting and then think you need to improve so that you can be mentioned in the same breath as George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. That is the goal of all people who should assume leadership on this planet Earth, and certainly in the United States. And he got some tax cuts, and he did the Abraham Accords, and those were good. And we did some good stuff with oil. And these guys, one created a country and one saved a country, and he basically lost an election because he didn't know how to behave. So I don't really think the comparisons are apt, and he's too old to change. But so any cheerfulness I had was kind of wiped away by that. But I'm ranting, and we should stop, and we'll be back tomorrow for your listening enjoyment. So for Christine, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.